Sean, Krish, thank you so much for joining us here at FundForum International.
Thank you.
Now, you were here to talk about the environment and India and the progress that's being made in this department in terms of investment. It's an extraordinary story, really, isn't it?
It's extraordinary. And what we don't understand in Europe is just how far advanced it is. When Prime Minister Modi announced there was going to be 100 gigawatts of renewable energy in 2022, a couple of years ago, when he came into power, overseas investors scoffed and say, oh, well, and people would say, don't worry, even if they achieve a third of it, it'll be a revolution. In India today, I can't find a fund manager or renewable energy developer who doesn't believe they're going to meet the targets. Whereas outside, we're still way behind. We're still thinking as if it's the India of 10 years ago. It's not, it's changed. And it's not only energy, it's water, it's smart cities, it's mobility. Extraordinary ambition, exactly what's needed to meet the Paris COP agreement.
Are you surprised by how the nation has sort of taken all of this on board and has gone with it, and how actually they're going to be leading the world?
Well, actually, usually we've done it before in IT. I get stopped at airports and asked to try computers. And after IT is sort of stabilized, this is going to be the next big thing for us. So there's an immense amount of government commitment, but there's an immense amount of private sector commitment. You know, it's like this. When you get the smartest people looking at a problem and finding innovative solutions for it, money has to follow. And green is not about doing good. It's about doing good and making money. And that's, I think, a very, very nice spot to be in. That's what we are looking at.
That's indeed a significant thing, isn't it? That it is financially going to prove to be profitable as well as being good for the world.
And it's worth noting that we're not talking about high risk, high yield here. The bulk of investments that are coming through to be available to European and US and Australian and Japanese investors are high credit rated investors. These are some form of mediation by the state that are providing auctions or solar contracts or PPAs or mobility investments around rail. So you get stuff which is safe, secure, but at least pays a bit of yield, which frankly doesn't exist in Europe and Japan. So it's an ideal set of investments that just weren't available before. We need to look forward and say it's coming through at scale. Investors need to be rethinking their asset allocations.
So what exactly are India doing that the rest of the world should be looking at?
Technically, there's a lot of stuff being done. For instance, coal companies are converting themselves into solar energy companies. But I'll speak on the financial side, which is more interesting for me. At the topmost level, we found that investors will come in if other investors come in. So we started creating an investment system, which is a public-private partnership in bringing money, small monies, relatively speaking, into making commercial green energy decisions. From the bottom up, we are developing instruments that people will feel safe with. For instance, we are designing a bond. Most investors want equity-like returns when they come to India. At the same time, they're scared of the currency risk, they're scared of the fact that the execution risk. So we are ring-fencing green energy assets, creating a bond where the revenue is directly escrowed into a bank account and paid out to the investors. These are listable instruments, they're credit rated, but because they're participating instruments, they actually give them an equity-like flavor. And that's the first step. Next, we could attract equity investments. Then, SEBI, for instance, just about 6 days ago, has come out with detailed regulations on developing green bonds, evaluating green bonds, certifying green bonds. And they're very, very, they're probably one of the best IOSCO regulations I've seen on that subject. And then, retail mutual funds can use that to build their own funds, which could then attract retail investors, and that's a huge market in India.
I was talking earlier to another panellist about sort of ESG, environmental investing and impact investing and its growth. Even 5 years ago, it was still a bit seen as a kind of lip service box ticking exercise, but that's really changed. Does it surprise you how quickly that change is happening?
Rapid change is always surprising, but what we know about change now is that things don't change in a linear fashion. They change in a step fashion. So 2008, suddenly QE was popular when it had been off the boards and so on. We're going to see that change in climate change, and there's an appreciation amongst investors of the forward risk now around step changes in climate. We're now seeing, for example, insurance companies having great concern about payout risk going forward because of significantly increased weather volatility as well as climate change. And that's beginning to flow on to it. So one of the leaders of this has been the COP agreement, or drivers this, the COP agreement, which has raised awareness amongst investors of the risk, but also of the risk of governments acting. So nowadays, they look to green bonds as a way of mitigating that risk and saying, if it's in that green bond category, I'm less likely to be affected by changing government action because of Paris Agreement. So it's therefore a lower risk profile for me. That's actually quite important. This has driven, if you like, the understanding that actually ESG is everywhere and everything because these risks are so macro and so huge. And that's part of it, really. But we're only at the beginning, This revolution in the next 5 years is going to be extraordinary. Where, part of it is because governments like India's are acting, there is going to be deal flow that just has not been there in the past. So even investors now who want to invest in green, which is about 60 trillion globally according to their statements, can't find a product. A product's coming through, you will see the portfolios change, you will see greater appreciation therefore of what they need to do on the brown side to get out.
It would be remiss of me not to bring up Mr. Trump and what's just happened. Do you think that will have an effect now on how people feel about this, and what impact do you think that will have?
That's an interesting one.
Well, I keep, at the Climate Bonds Initiative, we're an NGO, we get asked this all the time because we're a campaigner. And the answer is twofold. First is, at a government level, you've seen a whole lot of governments step up and be more assertive about the need to address climate change. Notably the Chinese government, the Indian government that has reinforced its work in this area, and a Brazilian government and so on. So that's actually had a perverse impact, right? The second thing is investors have come out in force and said, actually, that doesn't change anything for us because the forward risk is still there. This is merely a blip. So we had 200 investors write to President Trump in the US recently. We've had BlackRock today talk about how there is no change in how what they see as the urgency of beginning to address climate change. So it's a problem. It's a problem for all those scientists that are losing their jobs. It's a problem for the science that the US has led on, but it's not going to change global momentum.
So we've obviously talked a lot about India, we've mentioned China. Where is the rest of the world on this? And are they playing catch up?
Well, I'm going to say
we are trying to run ahead.
India is clearly running ahead, but so is China.
Yes,
So China's doing, I have to say, a breathtakingly ambitious turnaround strategy to make a brown economy into a green economy, and to try and tell all its trading partners, leapfrog to green, don't make the mistakes we did. That's interesting. Other countries are getting their act together. There's appetite. France has been very aggressive in the last few years. You can't build new houses in France now unless you've got solar or turf on the roof for insulation, for example. It's now regulation. Sweden has done amazing work, but we've got a long way to go.
So when you're at a conference like this and you've got an audience of 1,400 members of this industry, what do you hope they take away from what you had to say today?
From my part, I would say that they should remember that email was alternative mail, cell phone was alternative cell phone, and now they're talking about alternative energy. It's not going to be alternative for long. So if you're going to be a fund manager for any length of time, start learning to evaluate it now and build it into your portfolio.
This is a vast pipeline. As the Chinese vice premier has called it, this is a green revolution. It's not a matter now of if, it's only a matter of how fast. If you haven't got exposure and you're not widening your exposure, frankly, you're going to miss the growth story of the century.
Watch this space. Sean, Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Great
Thank
to
you.
talk.